The International WorldWisdomWell.com brings you this carefully curated rare audiobook, Cognitive Bias. Introduction. What are cognitive biases? Cognitive biases are systematic patterns of deviation from norm or rationality in judgment. These biases arise from the mental shortcuts or heuristics our brains use to process information quickly. While they can be helpful in making quick decisions, they often lead to errors in reasoning and judgment. Understanding cognitive biases is essential for personal growth, effective decision-making, and fostering more compassionate interactions with others. The constructed nature of biases. Cognitive biases are often perceived as inherent flaws in human thinking, but it's crucial to understand that they are constructs of the human mind. These biases are not always accurate representations of reality, but rather frameworks developed by our brains to simplify complex information processing. Recognizing the constructed nature of these biases helps us understand their limitations and enables us to approach them with a more critical and mindful perspective. The human construct of biases. Biases are mental shortcuts that our brains use to navigate the vast amount of information we encounter daily. They are not objective truths, but are influenced by various factors, including our experiences, culture, emotions, and social environment. These constructs help us make quick decisions, but can often lead to errors in judgment. 1. Evolutionary perspective. Cognitive biases evolved to enhance our ancestors' survival by enabling fast decision-making in uncertain and potentially dangerous environments. For instance, the availability heuristic allowed early humans to quickly recall and react to recent threats, thus increasing their chances of survival. 2. Cultural influences. Our cultural background shapes the biases we develop. Cultural norms, values, and practices influence how we perceive and interpret information. For example, individualistic cultures may foster overconfidence bias more than collectivist cultures, which emphasize group harmony and may exhibit in-group bias more prominently. 3. Emotional states. Emotions significantly impact our cognitive processes and can amplify certain biases. For instance, fear can enhance the availability heuristic, making us overestimate the likelihood of negative events. Similarly, a positive mood can increase optimism bias, leading us to underestimate potential risks. 4. Social environment. The social context in which we operate affects our biases. Social interactions, media exposure, and group dynamics all play a role in shaping how we process information and form judgments. For instance, confirmation bias is often reinforced in echo chambers where individuals are surrounded by like-minded people and information. Evolution of cognitive biases. Cognitive biases evolved as survival mechanisms. In the complex information-rich environments our ancestors faced, quick decision-making was crucial for survival. These mental shortcuts allowed early humans to make fast decisions without the need for prolonged deliberation. For instance, the ability to quickly recognize a threat and respond appropriately increased chances of survival. However, while these biases were beneficial in our evolutionary past, they can lead to less optimal decisions in modern, more complex societies. Recognizing and understanding cognitive biases. Learning from this overview of 15 biases can help us understand the construct of the world of biases and how to mindfully practice with them. Anchoring bias. Definition. Anchoring bias is the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information encountered, the anchor, when making decisions. Evolutionary roots. Early humans who quickly made decisions based on initial information could act swiftly in response to threats. This quick decision-making was often crucial for survival in unpredictable environments. Recognition. Notice when your judgment is disproportionately influenced by the first number or fact you encounter. For example, if you hear that a car is worth $30,000, you might perceive a $25,000 price as a great deal, even if the car's actual value is much lower. Mindfulness practice. Acknowledge the initial anchor, then deliberately seek out additional information and perspectives. Challenge the anchor by asking yourself if this initial piece of information is truly reliable and what other data might be relevant. Confirmation bias. Definition: confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information that confirms one's preconceptions. Evolutionary roots. Reinforcing existing beliefs helped early humans maintain a consistent and predictable understanding of their environment, which was crucial for survival. This stability in understanding could help in predicting outcomes and making decisions based on past experiences. Recognition. Be aware of situations where you selectively gather or recall information that supports your beliefs. For example, you might only read news sources that align with your political views and ignore those that offer opposing perspectives. Mindfulness. Practice. Challenge yourself to seek out information that contradicts your assumptions and reflect on its validity. Engage with diverse sources of information and viewpoints to broaden your understanding and reduce the impact of confirmation bias. Availability heuristic. Definition: the availability heuristic is a mental shortcut that relies on immediate examples that come to mind when evaluating a specific topic, concept, method, or decision. Evolutionary roots. Early humans who could quickly recall recent dangers or opportunities were more likely to survive. This ability to remember and act upon recent information helped in avoiding threats and capitalizing on opportunities. Recognition. Notice when your decisions are heavily influenced by recent events or vivid memories. For instance, after hearing about a plane crash, you might overestimate the dangers of flying, despite statistical evidence showing it is safe. Mindfulness practice. Take a step back and consider the broader context and statistical data rather than just the most memorable examples. Reflect on the base rates and frequency of events to make more balanced decisions. Hindsight bias. Definition: hindsight bias is the tendency to see events as having been predictable after they have already occurred. Evolutionary roots. This bias may have helped early humans learn from past experiences and better predict future events, enhancing their survival chances. By believing that they could have predicted events, individuals might have felt more in control and capable of avoiding future threats. Recognition. Reflect on your thought process after an event and acknowledge the unpredictability of the outcome before it occurred. For example, after a stock market crash, you might think you saw it coming, even if you didn't. Mindfulness practice. Remind yourself of the uncertainty inherent in predictions and avoid overestimating your ability to foresee outcomes. Practice humility in recognizing the limits of your foresight and the role of chance in events. Overconfidence. Bias. Definition: overconfidence bias is the tendency to overestimate one's abilities, knowledge, or chances of success. Evolutionary roots. Confidence can lead to decisive actions, which may have been crucial for survival and leadership in early human groups. Individuals who exhibited confidence might have been more likely to take risks and lead others, which could enhance group cohesion and survival. Recognition. Be aware of your confidence levels and check if they are supported by facts and data. For example, you might overestimate your ability to complete a project on time without considering potential obstacles. Mindfulness practice. Cultivate humility and regularly seek feedback to align your confidence with reality. Engage in reflective practices to assess your abilities and make more accurate judgments about your capabilities. Self-serving bias. Definition. Self-serving bias is the tendency to attribute positive events to one's own character, but attribute negative events to external factors. Evolutionary roots. This bias can protect self-esteem and enhance one's sense of control over life events, which could have been beneficial for mental health and motivation in early humans. Recognition. Notice when you attribute your successes to personal traits while blaming external factors for failures. For instance, you might credit your intelligence for a job promotion, but blame market conditions for a poor investment. Mindfulness. Practice. Reflect on the true causes of events and acknowledge the role of external factors in your successes and failures. Practice gratitude and recognize the contributions of others and circumstances in your achievements. In-group bias. Definition: the tendency to favor members of one's own group over those in other groups. Evolutionary roots. Favoring one's own group could enhance group cohesion and survival. Recognition. Be aware of preferential treatment towards those who belong to your social, cultural, or professional group. Mindfulness. Practice. Make an effort to understand and appreciate the perspectives and contributions of those outside your group. Status quo bias. Definition: the preference for the current state of affairs and resistance to change. Evolutionary roots. Stability and predictability could enhance survival in uncertain environments. Recognition. Notice when you resist change simply because it disrupts the current state. Mindfulness practice. Evaluate the benefits and potential growth that change can bring, rather than focusing solely on maintaining the status quo. Negativity bias. Definition: the tendency to give more weight to negative experiences or information than positive ones. Evolutionary roots. Being more attuned to potential dangers could have enhanced survival. Recognition. Pay attention to when you focus excessively on negative aspects of a situation. Mindfulness. Practice. Practice gratitude and intentionally focus on positive experiences to balance your perspective. Optimism bias. Definition: the tendency to overestimate the likelihood of positive outcomes and underestimate the likelihood of negative outcomes. Evolutionary roots. Optimism could increase motivation and persistence in the face of challenges. Recognition. Notice when you are overly optimistic about future events without considering potential risks. Mindfulness. Practice. Balance optimism with realistic assessments and contingency planning to prepare for various outcomes. Actor-observer bias. Definition: the tendency to attribute our own actions to external factors while attributing others' actions to their character. Evolutionary roots. This bias could enhance one's sense of control and predictability over personal actions. Recognition. Be aware of how you attribute causes to behaviors differently based on whether you are the actor or observer. Mindfulness. Practice. Reflect on both internal and external factors influencing actions, whether they are your own or others. Survivorship bias. Definition: the logical error of concentrating on people or things that made it past some selection process and overlooking those that did not. Evolutionary roots. Focusing on successful individuals or strategies could inform effective decision-making for survival. Recognition. Notice when you're drawing conclusions based on limited or non-representative data. Mindfulness practice. Consider the broader context and the unseen data or cases to make more informed decisions. Halo effect. Definition: the tendency for an impression created in one area to influence opinions in another area. Evolutionary roots. Quickly forming overall impressions of others could facilitate social interactions and group cohesion. Recognition. Be aware of how positive attributes in one area may bias your judgment in unrelated areas. Mindfulness practice. Evaluate different aspects of a person or situation independently to avoid halo effect biases. Stereotyping. Definition: the oversimplified and generalized beliefs about a group of people. Evolutionary roots. Categorizing individuals into groups could simplify social interactions and reduce cognitive load. Recognition. Notice when you're making generalizations about individuals based on group characteristics. Mindfulness. Practice. Challenge stereotypes by seeking individualized information and engaging with people as unique individuals. Gambler's fallacy. Definition: the belief that future probabilities are influenced by past events, despite the events being independent. Evolutionary roots. Detecting patterns in nature could help in predicting and preparing for future events. Recognition. Be mindful of how you assess probabilities and outcomes in chance-based situations. Mindfulness practice. Understand the nature of independent events and focus on statistical probabilities rather than perceived patterns. Moving beyond cognitive biases with presence. Embracing mindfulness. Mindfulness involves maintaining a moment-by-moment awareness of our thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, and surrounding environment. By practicing mindfulness, we can become more aware of our cognitive biases and how they influence our decisions. Mindfulness helps us observe our mental processes without judgment, creating space for more intentional and rational responses. Strategies for mindfulness. 1. Meditation. Regular meditation practice can enhance your awareness of biases and help you respond to situations more thoughtfully. Techniques such as focused attention on the breath or body scans can increase your ability to recognize when biases are influencing your thoughts. 2. Reflection. Spend time reflecting on past decisions and consider how biases may have influenced them. Journaling about your thought processes and decision-making can reveal patterns and biases that you might not have noticed. 3. Open-mindedness. Foster a mindset of curiosity and openness to new information, even if it contradicts your beliefs. Engage in discussions with people who have different perspectives and be willing to reconsider your viewpoints. 4. Deliberate decision-making. Take time to make decisions, especially important ones. Avoid rushing and consider multiple perspectives and data sources. Use structured decision-making processes to ensure that all relevant information is considered. 5. Feedback. Seeking. Actively seek feedback from others to identify biases you may not notice yourself. Encourage constructive criticism and be open to changing your mind based on new information. The future of cognitive biases. As our environment continues to evolve, so too may our cognitive biases. Advances in technology, changes in social structures, and new forms of communication will shape how biases manifest and influence our decisions. Future cognitive biases might emerge from interactions with artificial intelligence, the influence of social media, and the increasing complexity of global issues. Anticipating future biases. 1. AI interaction bias. As AI becomes more integrated into our lives, we may develop biases based on how these systems present information and make decisions. For example, we might over-rely on AI recommendations without critically evaluating their accuracy or appropriateness. 2. Digital echo chambers. Social media algorithms that curate content to our preferences can reinforce confirmation bias and create echo chambers. This can lead to polarized opinions and reduced exposure to diverse viewpoints. 3. Information overload. The sheer volume of information available can lead to decision paralysis or an over-reliance on heuristics. We might struggle to discern credible information from noise, leading to superficial or biased decisions. Preparing for the future. To navigate these emerging biases, we must cultivate critical thinking, adaptability, and continuous learning. By staying informed about technological advancements and their implications, and by fostering a culture of mindfulness and openness, we can mitigate the impact of cognitive biases on our decisions and actions. 1. Education and training. Promote education and training programs that teach critical thinking, media literacy, and the recognition of cognitive biases. Encourage lifelong learning to keep up with new developments and challenges. 2. Technology design. Advocate for the ethical design of technology that considers cognitive biases and aims to minimize their negative impacts. Support transparency and accountability in AI systems and algorithms. 3. Community engagement. Foster inclusive and diverse communities that encourage open dialogue and the sharing of different perspectives. Create spaces where people feel safe to express their views and challenge their biases. 4. Mindful practices. Continue to integrate mindfulness practices into daily life and professional settings. Encourage regular reflection and self-awareness to enhance decision-making and interpersonal interactions. Biases as simplifications. While cognitive biases serve as mental shortcuts, they simplify the complexity of the world, often at the expense of accuracy. They are frameworks that reduce cognitive load, but can mislead us when applied inappropriately. Recognizing the limits of biases, understanding that biases are human constructs and not absolute truths is essential for mitigating their negative impacts. Recognizing their limitations allows us to approach decision-making with greater awareness and critical thinking. 1. Critical examination. Question the validity of your initial judgments and consider whether they are influenced by cognitive biases. For instance, when faced with a decision, ask yourself if you are overly relying on recent events, availability heuristic, or initial information, anchoring bias. 2. Seek diverse perspectives. Actively seek out information and viewpoints that challenge your preconceptions. This helps counteract confirmation bias and provides a more balanced understanding of complex issues. 3. Reflect on emotional influences. Acknowledge how your emotions may be influencing your judgments. Practicing emotional awareness can help mitigate the impact of biases such as the availability heuristic and optimism bias. 4. Contextual awareness. Consider the broader context and situational factors when making judgments. Recognizing the role of external factors can help reduce fundamental attribution error and self-serving bias. Moving beyond biases. To move beyond cognitive biases, we must adopt strategies that promote mindful and rational thinking. This involves integrating mindfulness practices, fostering open-mindedness, and encouraging continuous learning. 1. Mindfulness practices. Regular mindfulness meditation can increase awareness of cognitive biases and enhance our ability to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. Techniques such as mindful breathing and body scans can help us observe our thoughts without judgment. 2. Open-mindedness. Cultivate a mindset of curiosity and openness to new information. Engage in discussions with people who have different perspectives and be willing to reconsider your viewpoints. This helps reduce the impact of biases such as confirmation bias and in-group bias. 3. Continuous learning. Commit to lifelong learning and self-improvement. Stay informed about new research on cognitive biases and decision-making. Educate yourself about different cultures, perspectives, and disciplines to broaden your understanding and reduce biases. 4. Structured decision-making. Implement structured decision-making processes that incorporate multiple perspectives and data sources. Techniques such as pros and cons lists, decision matrices, and scenario planning can help mitigate the influence of biases. There is no definitive number of cognitive biases because new biases are continuously identified and studied by psychologists and researchers. The field of cognitive psychology is dynamic, and as our understanding of human cognition evolves, so does our catalogue of biases. However, it's commonly estimated that there are dozens, if not over 100, recognized cognitive biases. Some comprehensive lists and resources enumerate over 180 biases, but the exact number can vary depending on how they are categorized and defined. In summary, while there is a broad and growing list of cognitive biases, the exact number is fluid and subject to ongoing research and refinement. Cognitive biases are human-constructed frameworks designed to simplify complex information processing. While they evolved to enhance survival, they are not always accurate representations of reality and can lead to errors in judgment. Recognizing the constructed nature of biases allows us to approach them with a critical and mindful perspective. By adopting strategies that promote mindfulness, open-mindedness, and continuous learning, we can move beyond cognitive biases and make more informed, rational decisions. Understanding and mitigating cognitive biases not only improves our decision-making, but also fosters more compassionate and effective interactions with others. Here's a list of 50 various cognitive biases, along with brief descriptions. 1. Anchoring bias. Relying too heavily on the first piece of information encountered when making decisions. 2. Confirmation bias. Seeking, interpreting, and remembering information that confirms pre-existing beliefs. 3. Availability, heuristic, making judgments based on readily available information or examples that come to mind. 4. Hindsight bias, seeing events as predictable or obvious after they have occurred. 5. Overconfidence bias, overestimating one's abilities, knowledge, or chances of success. 6. Self-serving bias, attributing successes to internal factors and failures to external factors. 7. Sunk cost fallacy, continuing an endeavor because of past investments despite the lack of future benefits. 8. Fundamental attribution. Error, attributing others' behaviors to their character while attributing our own behaviors to external factors. 9. In-group bias, favoring members of one's own group over those outside the group. 10. Status quo bias, preferring the current state of affairs and resisting change. 11. Negativity bias, giving more weight to negative experiences or information than positive ones. 12. Dunning-Kruger effect, overestimating one's abilities in a particular domain, often due to lack of knowledge or expertise. 13. Optimism bias, overestimating the likelihood of positive outcomes and underestimating the likelihood of negative ones. 14. Actor-observer bias, attributing one's own actions to external factors while attributing others' actions to their character. 15. Survivorship bias, focusing on people or things that have survived some selection process and overlooking those that did not. 16. Halo effect, allowing a single positive trait or aspect of a person to influence overall judgments. 17. Stereotyping, making generalized assumptions about a group of people based on their perceived characteristics. 18. Gambler's fallacy, believing that future probabilities are influenced by past events, despite events being independent. 19. Planning fallacy, underestimating the time, costs, and risks of future actions and overestimating the benefits. 20. Observer expectancy effect, allowing expectations or beliefs to influence observations and interpretations of data. 21. Framing effect, making decisions based on how information is presented rather than on the actual information itself. 22. Recency bias, giving more weight to recent events or information when making judgments or decisions. 23. Social desirability bias, presenting oneself in a favorable light or conforming to social norms when responding to surveys or interviews. 24. Loss aversion, preferring to avoid losses rather than acquiring equivalent gains. 25. Illusory correlation, perceiving a relationship between two variables when no such relationship exists or is weak. 26. False consensus effect, overestimating the extent to which others share our beliefs, attitudes, or behaviors. 27. Anchoring and adjustment, using an initial piece of information, the anchor, as a reference point and adjusting subsequent judgments accordingly. 28. Primacy effect, remembering information presented at the beginning of a list or sequence more easily than information presented later. 29. Recency effect, remembering information presented at the end of a list or sequence more easily than information presented earlier. 30. Curse of knowledge, difficulty in imagining what it's like for someone else not to know something that you know. 31. Semantic priming, the tendency for recently used words or concepts to influence the interpretation of subsequent words or concepts. 32. Time-saving bias, underestimating the time it takes to complete a task or achieve a goal. 33. Curiosity, gap bias, being more attracted to information or content when there is a gap between what we know and what we want to know. 34. Decoy effect, the phenomenon where consumers will tend to have a specific change in preference between two options when also presented with a third option that is asymmetrically dominated. 35. Endowment effect, valuing an object more once ownership has been established. 36. False memory, a psychological phenomenon where a person recalls something that did not happen or remembers it differently from the way it actually happened. 37. Zero-risk bias, preference for reducing a small risk to zero over a greater reduction in a larger risk. 38. Parkinson's law of triviality, the tendency to give disproportionate weight to trivial issues. 39. Anecdotal evidence, relying on personal experiences or anecdotes rather than systematic empirical evidence. 40. Authority bias, the tendency to attribute greater accuracy to the opinion of an authority figure or expert and be more influenced by that opinion. 41. Belief bias, evaluating the strength of an argument based on the believability of its conclusion rather than its logical structure. 42. Barnum effect, the tendency to accept vague or general statements as personally meaningful, often seen in horoscopes or personality tests. 43. Reactive devaluation, devaluing proposals or offers simply because they originate from an adversary or opposing party. 44. IKEA effect, overvaluing products or outcomes that one has partially created or contributed to. 45. Mere exposure effect, developing a preference for things merely because they are familiar. 46. Projection bias, assuming that others share the same beliefs, thoughts, or feelings as oneself. 47. System justification, bias, the tendency to defend and justify the status quo even when it may be disadvantageous or unjust. 48. Pessimism, bias, overestimating the likelihood of negative outcomes and underestimating positive ones. 49. Empathy gap, the inability to understand or predict one's own or others' emotions and behavior in different emotional states. 50. Placebo effect, experiencing a perceived improvement in condition due to the belief in the effectiveness of a treatment that is actually inert. Thank you for spending time here at the World Wisdom Well and learning from cognitive bias. We hope you find this audiobook insightful and use it to reference and refresh time and time again. Thank you for receiving our gift of the heart. Please share this resource with those who may benefit from it. May we all be happy. May we all be well. May we all practice deeper understanding of our inner workings to grow warm hearts and compassionate wisdom for building our human family as strong as a mountain.